Having a screenplay and having a story are not the same thing. They should be, but just because you have 100 or so pages of script where you have characters, a premise you think is interesting, and some stuff happening, does not mean that you have a story. So I'm going to break down what a story is, and this is about as simple as I can make it. If you've been around this channel for any length of time, and hopefully you've committed this to memory by now, so if you know what a story is, say it with me. A story is about someone who wants something badly, is having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. That is a story. And when we talk about story structure, that piece is the second act. It is not the whole movie, it's the second act of the movie. And there are some mistakes that writers make when it comes to writing a screenplay story, and I'll circle back to those in a second, but I want to get through the structure part first. So if the definition of story is what takes place in the second act, the first act is primarily about setup, and it includes two things. There's status quo, which is what the world of the movie is like on a day-to-day basis, really what is normal life like for our protagonist. And the second part of the setup includes a decision is introduced and made by the protagonist to pursue the thing that they want badly, which pushes them into the second act. And then, whether the protagonist gets the thing they want or not, either way, we get an answer at the end of the second act. But the third act, then, is the aftermath. It's really the fallout consequences of what has happened as a result of what happened at the end of the second act. But don't misunderstand fallout here, because that makes it seem like, or might make it seem like, the third act is just there to kind of wrap things up. And while that's kind of true, the third act is often where the protagonist and the antagonist really have it out. I mean, this is the climactic battle or scene or moment. It's the true love's kiss that we've been waiting for. It's the moment that Maximus and Commodus actually fight. It's the moment when Luke has to blow up the Death Star. And all of those are third act fallouts as a result of what happened at the end of the second act, whether the character got what they wanted or not. And in the case of The Princess Bride and Gladiator, the protagonist does not get what they want at the end of the second act, and so what follows is the fallout. In Star Wars, Luke does get what he wants, and yet the third acts are all where the fallouts happen. So let's make an example here. This is not an actual movie, although the bones of it are probably several movies. If you recognize the very basic outline I'm about to give you as an actual movie, drop it in the comments below. And if you're finding value, by the way, don't forget about all the fun buttons. Okay, let's say we've got a guy, Phil, and Phil is a good dude for the most part. I mean, he's got flaws like everybody. He's not perfect, but he's a pretty good dude. And Phil wants to get married. He's ready to settle down. All he needs is to find that girl that he adores and the one who adores him, and all that other stuff that goes with it. So in Act 1, when we meet Phil, it is his life as normal. He's checking his dating apps. He's going to mixers. He even lets his friends set him up on a date, and they end up going bowling. But while he's at the bowling alley, he sees a girl who is striking. I mean, literally, she's throwing strikes, but she's also his type. But he's not going to do anything right then, because he's a good dude. Phil's a good guy, and he's already on a date. But he sees this other girl, and he tries to, kind of passively gather a few tidbits of information without being rude to his current date. And so now he has a decision to make. Is he going to keep doing what he's been doing, all his dating apps, his mixers, and all that stuff, or is he going to try to find this girl and try to woo her? And after some hemming and hawing and some pep talks from friends, he decides he's gonna track her down. And while this might seem a little bit stalker-like behavior, it's a rom-com, so a little bit of stalking at the beginning is not too creepy. Plus, we know Phil's a good guy and his intentions are pure, so we're gonna give him a pass on this one. But in real life, don't be stalking. So Phil manages to find this girl the next week at the same bowling alley, and he works his charms. He finds out that her name is Jasmine, and she is intrigued, but she's not yet convinced about Phil being the guy. And so Phil is in, and Phil wants a relationship with Jasmine badly, but he's going to have trouble getting it. And at the end of the second act, he's going to have a relationship with her, or he isn't. But what does a relationship actually mean anyway? I mean, that's just too nebulous. Like, what is it? Like, they've held hands, he's kissed her, they've gone on 5 dates, 10 dates. Like, what's the measurable thing? Well, thankfully, Phil has a big fundraising dinner that his company is putting on. And Phil is expected to be there and to bring a date. And Phil wants to bring Jasmine. So that is his measurable goal. And our story is now refined to, will Phil bring Jasmine to the fundraiser dinner? Yes or no? Very simple. That's what the second act is all about. Is he going to develop a relationship with her enough to be able to bring her to this fundraising dinner? He's probably going to have some trouble along the way, but we have faith in Phil at this point. So Phil spends the second act trying to woo Jasmine because he wants to bring her to this dinner. But more than that, Phil wants to settle down, right? But Jasmine's just come out of a bad relationship, we find out, and she's in no hurry to jump back into one. So she's just taking her time. Well, Phil thinks she's dragging her feet and isn't that interested in him. And she likes Phil, but he's just such a nice, safe guy. She wishes he was a bit more adventurous. And that's true. Phil is a safe guy. In fact, it's one thing that Phil's boss brings up a lot, that he wishes Phil was willing to take a few more risks. Not reckless risks, but measured risks. That Phil's not too sure about the addition of adventure into his life, but he finally decides to start doing little things like wearing a different tie on Tuesdays and wearing the occasional blue shirt instead of his normal white shirts. He's even exercising a little, and Jasmine is happy about this, but again, she's not quite willing to commit. And Phil's kind of scared to ask anyway or even profess his feelings about her because that might be a little too risky. But finally, after everything, Jasmine agrees to go to the fundraiser and Phil is on cloud 9. He even wears a new tie for the event. And both Phil and Jasmine arrive at the fundraiser, and the answer to our second act main tension question, will Phil bring Jasmine to the fundraiser dinner, has been answered. And we are now in the third act. But it doesn't take long for things to go awry at the fundraiser, and one thing leads to another, and Jasmine and Phil get into a big fight right in the middle of the fundraiser. She throws champagne all over his new tie, there's yelling, embarrassing things are said, and all in all, it's just a complete disaster. I mean, Jasmine is done with Phil, and she storms out. The fundraiser continues, but Phil is devastated and probably near losing his job, but he's just so nice and somehow manages to salvage his career. But his personal life is in shambles, and now we are looking forward to what else is going to happen now as a result of this fallout at the end of the second act. And Phil begins to work on himself, reaching out to Jasmine slowly over time. He's taking a few more risks and chances, and when he finally convinces her to meet, she realizes he has changed and become the man that she hoped he would become. And Phil's patience and persistence has paid off, and Jasmine is now ready to enter into a long-term relationship with Phil. And Phil, being the risk taker that he now is, he's already spoken with Jasmine's parents to get their blessing, and as the movie ends, Phil is asking Jasmine to marry him. And of course, because this is a happy ending, she says yes. So for the structure of the story, there is Act 1, which is the setup. It includes a status quo life and a decision. Act 2 is the bulk of the story. Someone who wants something badly, having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. And Act 3 is the fallout from Act 2. And that is the very basics of what you need to have a story. But mistakes get made all the time from aspiring screenwriters because they don't include these basic pieces in their screenplay. So mistakes like not having a story in the second act at all. I mean, if someone is not pursuing something measurable and we don't know if they get it or not, you don't have a story. It's just a bunch of Act 1 and Act 3, which is not a story. Or the opposite, trying to make the definition of the story the entire movie, which results in no proper first act or no third act. Okay, there's no status quo, there's no decision, there's no fallout. It's just this person pursuing something, they get it or they not, movie ends. Okay, that's not a movie. That's sort of a story, but it's not a movie. It's only the second act. Or you take too long to set up the story, and now Act 1 is 50 pages long, which is way too long. Okay, all you need is status quo, something that disrupts the status quo, like Phil seeing Jasmine for the first time, and a decision gets made. So not having the character either A, A, be faced with a decision, and then B, making the decision, okay, that's a recipe for disaster. You're not setting up the story properly. Now, the time between when they're faced with a decision and when they make the decision can be a few minutes, can be a few pages. If you want to do it in script terms, can be a few pages, can be several pages, might be on the same page. Okay, it depends on the nature of the story and on how you choose to tell that story. And there are a lot of other mistakes that get made, but if you know what a story is, and if you know what pieces you need to include in your script to have an actual story, you can avoid nearly all of them. Now, you still have to tell the story in a compelling way, but you'll at least know you have the bones of a solid story. Now, if you want to know more about story structure, be sure to get my book. It's linked below. If you want to learn something else about screenwriting, watch this. Don't forget about fun buttons and other links below that might be helpful to you. And when you tell a story, make sure that you have an actual story and tell a story that matters. See you later.